My name is Ellice Patterson. I am the founder and executive artistic director of Abilities Dance. We're a disabled dance company that uses dance and art overall as a tool to promote intersectional disability rights. And we do that through our performing company, which are all adult artists, professional, getting paid for that work, that are not just dancers and choreographers, but musicians and composers, and a costume designer for humans and mobility aids, and a team of folks to make the work accessible and more. And we use performance as kind of that introductory representation to a variety of identities and intersectional social justice issues that we all are experiencing. And then in our community engagement work, we go a little deeper where we have conversations like this, or lectures or movement workshops, and really take the time to, in whatever space we're in, have a conversation of how we can better build equity in our communities, both intergenerational, multicultural communities, because disability exists in every identity, and it's important to acknowledge that. I got into this work because I personally couldn't find a place to professionally dance in the Boston area as a disabled dancer. And also I wasn't seeing the stories that really resonated with my identity and culture that was coming from a disabled perspective. And the more that I started doing this work, the more that I realized that not only is disability work really white, but it's also very non-disabled led. And that can have bigger impacts than one can realize, especially if someone isn't actively dismantling their own internalized ableism and ableism that they're seeing in other spaces. And I think the most introductory or first step of what I was seeing was that they're just, particularly in spaces where disabled students existed, teachers, predominantly non-disabled teachers, weren't exposing students to disabled artists or disabled leaders in any field. And that can have a strong impact on the students' learning because they're not seeing themselves reflected in positions of not just employment, but in leadership. And that can have such an impact in how a student feels that they can or can't be seen. And that is kind of my first step of ensuring that if the teacher themselves or whomever doesn't identify as disabled, that they're providing access to doing their own research of who these folks are, even if they can't bring people into their school or studio or wherever space they are, they can still expose folks to the numerous amounts of YouTube videos and TED Talks and whatnot of folks in this space doing this work, because there is a certain level of access and community understanding that just frankly exists in our community that can't be duplicated elsewhere in other non-disabled identities. And I try to use our shows as a tool that others can see and not just learn from, but share, so that folks are starting to get more understandings of the nuance of our community, and that they're able to show that with their students of who they are and what they can become. And so I thought I would show a scene from our most recent ballet inversion, where I and our director of music, Andrew Cho, were talking about how we had a really successful ballet last year where we reinvented Firebird. But we thought, what if we created our own story? Instead of retrofitting ourselves into stories that weren't made for us, what if we created those stories and coming from that identity? And that led to this really beautiful collaboration of this multidisciplinary art form that existed on stage, where Andrew wrote the full score and I wrote the audio descriptions and overall artistic direction, choreography, whatnot of the show. This particular scene is titled Neurodivergence, and it is really thinking about the artist, as well as myself and Andrew, all identify as neurodivergent. And most of us are outside of the autistic spectrum, which a lot of folks don't realize that neurodivergence is outside of autism, as well as can have multiple identities and multiple variations of the same identity within that community. And so highlighting that important representation, especially since neurodivergence is also unfortunately really white led. And that can also have impacts of how folks are assessing the work and how folks are able to understand the nuance and broadness of our community, so that way they can share that with others. Teachers are our first introduction to learning about ourselves and about the world and what we can be in it. So it's important to make sure that folks are aware of that power and impact in showing videos like this as representation and others that exist out there. But back to this ballet. For those who haven't seen our work, things to note is that we have audio descriptions, which are words that explain the movement for blind and moving audiences, embedded within the music for everyone to hear. So it's an equitable experience that isn't just basic movement description, but also narration, so that the text is as rich as the movements that folks can see on stage. In addition, we have live captioning as well as ASL interpreters at our shows without anyone needing to request that. It's built into all of our shows, so folks can just be able to enter our spaces as equitably as possible, as well as allowing the live stream option, especially during this time, so that folks can feel safe and continue to integrate into our work. And another note that is very great about this particular scene and all the scenes in the ballet is that we partnered with Gateway Arts, which is a visual arts nonprofit here in Brookline for primarily developmentally disabled artists. And we commissioned them to paint different paintings inspired by the scenes that you see. So you'll see one of those paintings there. And it's great to be able to combine that, in addition to Andrew conducting a 7-person orchestra to really bring out more of the movement and nuance to the scene. So I will pause talking there and play the scene and then come back and chat about it. What if in the New Boston we've learned from and embraced neurodivergence as a diverse mind capable of anything instead of a deficit? Leslie and Jamie face us with right bent arm and left bent leg rising and down, arms straighten, suspend them with arms diagonally, arms wrapped in a moment of self-soothing in this overstimulation, legs kick back and forth in a comforting repetition. They open up and skip back with arms circling. They repeat this phrase to the right as stemming gives some strength. Right arm bends up and left arm swipes across it in this beautifully abstract shape. Spinning and hopping, side to side, creates this fuzzy frame feeling as the clock melts, making time abstract too. Arms rise. Right arm and left leg bend up, facing left, then right. Arms brush off distractions as they hyper-focus on this dance. Like a pendulum rocking on a clock, they say left to right, bigger and bigger. Right arm circles overhead and leads to spin them in a form of self-regulation. Feet tiptoe around the floor to minimize sensation. Leg picks around with arms curved up to face left. Right, then left hand comes to head in the strain of processing the movements and social interactions. Hands release to lower torso, reaching in the same direction and spinning underneath arm as bent right arm lowers with left arm extended. They hop into a deep bend, rooted in the sky as arms open wide. They lower to sky, embracing the breeze of fleeting memories. Curved arms rise and open. Reaching down to pivot up with left bent leg facing in towards each other, looking down with bent arms at their face as if searching for the right words in the middle of a brain fog. Unwrapping and spinning with arms at their sides like a fidget toy. They pause as arms bend in. They flick back assumptions of what neurodivergence looks like as they repeat movements in a moment of self remind you that neurodivergence is more than autistic white boys. They circle with bent arms to show the abstraction of neurodivergence. They lower to their knees, reaching out hands to offer that neurodivergence is even more than autism. Lowering to sit with left arm extended out. Rooted in the sky and spectrum of this identity, pushing pelvis up with arm to assert femininity in this identity. Setting arms grab head as they deal with the frustrations of a mind in a world not made for us. Bending into themselves and reaching up. One arm extending out for relief from the brain fog of this strange neurotypical way of thinking. Finding balance in the wind of swirling thoughts, they rise with hands on the ground. Right leg kicked side to side and across as they stand and pivot back. They both find comfort in different stemming ways. FYI, stemming is not just making weird movements, but using the body to calm ourselves in a very triggering world. In the new Boston, this is normalized in every space and every position, including executive leadership. Arms continue to brush off how in the past we've masked our memory loss, twitching and other ways we've tried to fit in. Left arm guides right hand around to face right, struggling to balance between intrusive thoughts. They slide into a lunge. Back right leg bends up as torso lowers to fit in the theme of abstract shapes, like abstract thoughts in our mind. Arms bend in at their chest facing us as they lower into an arabesque, showing us how to understand our diverse minds and bodies. Spinning to face left with right and left hand, pushing against societal norms meant to exclude us. Hands slide up to head as we work through the intensity of brain fog while still performing and existing in a neurotypical way. They walk backwards against this need to mask how they exist from the old Boston. Right hand rises as left hand lowers it to left hip as hands slip over into the right arm, circling and reaching out and down. Arms form a V, then hands make fist over their chest. Torso rolls in this moment of self-actualization. Left hand caresses cheek and down as they find comfort within their community. They hop into an arabesque in a moment of joy. Hand circles around as they skip right to left like the nonlinear journey of time we neurodivergence experience, but we always support one another, like Jamie's and Leslie's arms interlocking. They connect in various ways like we support one another with diagnosis information, medicine reaction, executive functioning hacks, and a reminder of our humanity in old Boston that refuse to see us as capable employees and leaders in the workplace and overall community. Leslie's hand slides down Jamie's arms in a moment of decreasing overstimulation that causes many of us to pause at life, release each other's hands and ankles cross. Jamie supports Leslie as she leans back with right leg rising in a moment of reciprocal care from neurodivergent folks. Stepping away and facing each other, hands come to opposite shoulder as they step towards the right corner as hands make patterns touching different parts of the body and hop to repeat towards left corner. Ankles connect as they push away from each other again. Hand touches forehead in a moment of relief, looking up towards breath and down to the sky with bent knee connecting to elbow. Pivot to front, left wrist and rising ankle turn in a moment of calming the body and owning your own grip time. Left arm extends to side as they lunge forward. Hands bent in at their sides as torso rolls, wondering how to get folks to embrace the new Boston now that more neurodivergents are proud and safe together. They jump into an X, back in, and again, each time nurturing their needs and their time for themselves to be. Hand shoots out in a diagonal as they hop left and right, facing front, their hands clasped as left leg rises and pivots to face right. Lower torso rolls as hands release. They rise with bent arms and bent knee rising. Torso lowers as arms circle them around to the left. Arms release and make an X across the chest as they slowly pivot. They lower to the sky as their neurodivergent identities are being questioned in this time of community seeking. Rounding higher into the sky, they explain how neurodiversion includes many identities, including PTSD, epilepsy and seizure-causing disorders, traumatic brain injuries, ADHD, and more. Which is what literally all of us dancers, myself and Andrew, identify as. And these identities manifest in different ways when you take into account racial, cultural backgrounds, regional dialects, and more that exist on a spectrum far beyond autism, which is a more resourced and understood. That is until you get out of the K-12 system and become an adult. That's for next year's ballet. They rise. They continue openly stemming in an act of defiance. They set the tone for what it would mean with neurodivergence as a norm, and things like direct language, easy access to resources, and other elements that make the city truly welcoming to all minds. Back to back, in the back, Leslie bends backward as Jamie supports her, bending over. They release. Wrist cross and hands connect in a moment of access intimacy. Hands cross chest and release as they do a series of spins towards the front, each time picking up their inner light to the alternate knee as they brace us with their presence. Right bent arm rises as head tilts right. Left bent arm rises to hip as they embrace the metaphysical relationship between mind and body. Hand touches forehead as they look up to grasp and ground at that encrypt time. The past and present will always converge for many neurodivergent folks, but we continue on this wonderfully complex and new Boston where our voices will matter. They stretch into a deep bend as hands wrap themselves around in a hug, an act of self-care as wrists cross and hands rotate around each other and rise. Hands release as arms make large circles around, reminding us that time isn't linear and we must learn from and embrace the past and present if we can ever sustain change in Boston in the future, for neurodivergence and all. So that was a big piece. And I know that these concepts might be new for folks, but it's important to, instead of thinking of feeling as if, I've been in the field for 30 years, this is what it is, realizing the inequities that have existed in this field, and thinking about the voices that are coming out from folks who do identify, what does that mean for them? And to continue to think of how to include representation within your lessons and curriculum, guest speakers, workshops, etc., to make sure that students are seeing diverse identities within the deaf and disabled community as a whole, so that they can learn from each other, grow, be allies to other identities, feel as if their identity is reflected from those that do, and how we can continue to build this field and our community overall as a more equitable space. Feel free to reach out at abilitiesadvancedboston@gmail.com if there are any questions from what you just saw, processing any of that. I'm happy to accept any positive and constructive questioning so that we can continue to grow together and continue this cycle. So thank you.